Okay, so picture this, it's my 55th birthday. I'm finally kind of at peace after, well, a decade of chaos. And suddenly my parents call me with a funny surprise. They've invited my ex-husband, the one who basically wrecked my life, to my party. Yeah, I know. Right. At first, I thought they were joking. But here's the thing. They weren't. And what happened next? Well, it completely turned everything upside down. You're gonna want to hear this? So, there I was, sitting in my sunlit study. And, well, not doing what I should have been doing, which was, finalizing a multi-million-dollar merger. No, instead, I'm staring at floral arrangements for my 55th birthday, feeling like a delicate, cracked piece of china that someone had tried to glue back together without much care. The past decade had been brutal divorce, financial wreckage, sleepless nights, endless court battles, and finally, I thought I was safe, stable, at least somewhat at peace. This party wasn't just a birthday. It was a symbol that I'd survived, that I could breathe without fear, that I could finally, just exist for myself. I had my tea, lukewarm and forgotten, sitting in a delicate porcelain cup, and I was trying to focus on the arrangements. Peonies, gardenias. God, do I even remember what I like anymore? And then my phone buzzed. Just this little innocuous buzz against the porcelain. But suddenly it felt like a hammer. I picked it up, thinking, okay, probably mom calling to chat about the table settings or her outfit for the party. Smile on my face, I answered, "Hi, Mom. Perfect timing. What's up?" And the conversation started innocently enough. Her voice, breezy, casual, like we were discussing flowers or something trivial. But then, without warning, the tone shifted, just ever so slightly, enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "We thought you could use a good laugh," she said. My heart skipped a beat, and then came the words that made it stop entirely. "We invited Cameron, my ex-husband, the man who had systematically drained our accounts, mortgaged our home behind my back, left me in financial ruin, and vanished from my life a decade ago. The cup, I swear, it was like time slowed, slipped through my fingers. Brown tea sprayed across the polished wood desk, onto my cream linen trousers, onto the calendar and papers that had been carefully organized, and the sound of it shattering the porcelain, crunching against the desk, echoed like a gunshot in the sudden, deafening silence of my mind. I couldn't breathe, not immediately. Anyway, it was like the air had been knocked out of me, and I was frozen, staring at the spread of tea, shards scattered like the pieces of my own carefully rebuilt life. The initial disbelief, the pure, unfiltered shock, gave way to something else. A cold, tight coil in my stomach. That kind of mix between nausea and anger that makes your limbs tingle and your heart pound so hard you can hear it in your ears. My hands were shaking, my pulse racing, and yet I had to speak. "What did you say?" My voice came out as a whisper, each word almost impossible to force, past the dry lump in my throat. But then the laughter started. My mother's tinkling, utterly unconcerned laugh, followed by my father's booming, a jovial chuckle, both utterly dismissive of the chaos they just inflicted on me. A joke, they called it, a way to lighten the mood. And that was it. 10 years of pain, of betrayal, of clawing my way back. And they thought it was funny. My chest felt tight, each breath shallow, the pressure almost physical. My blood pressure cuff, still in its box from the doctor's recent orders, suddenly felt suffocating. I was supposed to be resting, recovering from burnout, from the kind of crushing stress that can physically break a person. And yet here I was, thrown into another kind of chaos, emotional this time. And it was just as sharp, just as painful. The shock, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of them, the realization that they were siding with the man who had destroyed me hit me like a wave. I could feel the fine china of my composure shattering from the inside out. I paced the study, shards crunching under my shoes, the brown tea stains spreading across the desk like a dark, accusing shadow. And here's the thing, you know when something happens, and it's so utterly ridiculous, so completely impossible that your mind starts racing in 100 directions at once. Yeah, that was me, trying to process the layers of betrayal. 10 years of loyalty, support, financial sacrifice, emotional labor. And yet they chose him, the man who had taken everything from me. I had fought for my life, my career, my sanity. They had witnessed the devastation firsthand. And now, suddenly, the people who had held my hand through the worst of it were actively, gleefully letting him back in. The anger bubbled up, a cold, sharp clarity slicing through the haze of shock. It wasn't just that they were inviting him. No, it was that they didn't even see it as a problem. Their amusement, their laughter, it wasn't a misstep or a moment of poor judgment. It was a declaration. And I felt the first stirrings of resolve, my hands still trembling. I reached for the phone again, dialing instinctively, though I wasn't sure yet what I would say. The words were coming out in a rush, a mix of disbelief and calculated anger. The kind that creeps up on you when you're forced to confront someone's complete lack of understanding for the impact of their actions. Mom, Dad, I said, and for the first time in years, my voice was flat, almost eerily calm. We need to talk about this, but I didn't linger. I hung up before they could respond, leaving the teacup shards and the brown stain as my only companions. That afternoon blurred into a surreal haze. The mandated rest, the doctor's insistence on downtime, it all vanished. I didn't eat. I didn't sit. I just paced, the room spinning, my mind flipping through every interaction, every past betrayal, every financial and emotional scar left by Cameron, trying to piece together how, why, and most importantly, what to do next. The anger settled into something sharper, more precise. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, practical, and strategic. And for a lawyer, for someone whose entire career is built on understanding risk, contracts, and consequences, this was a puzzle that demanded a solution. I couldn't let it stand. Not this time. The teacup, broken on the desk, became a symbol of it all, fragile, shattered, but also a marker of transformation. If the china could break, then maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild something stronger from the pieces. And in that moment, amid the adrenaline, the disbelief, and the cold clarity, I made a silent vow. I wasn't going to react like a hurt daughter. I was going to act like the lawyer I had spent decades becoming. The one who sees every move, every loophole, every hidden agenda. That day, on that Tuesday afternoon, my 55th birthday preparations became secondary. They faded into the background as I shifted focus to the real task, taking control of a situation that had been engineered to humiliate and destabilize me. I didn't know all the details yet, but I knew one thing for certain: the party. My parents' laughter. Cameron's smile. They were all part of a game, and I was done being the unwitting player. It was time to stand up, gather every shred of evidence, and turn the table. And yeah, it sounds intense, but sometimes life hits you with this kind of surreal moment, and all you can do is decide how you're going to respond. That broken teacup wasn't just a mess to clean up, it was the first spark of clarity that told me, right, this isn't over. Not even close. I remember sitting there, staring at my parents' laughter through the phone, feeling like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. It wasn't just that they invited Cameron, it was the gleeful way they did it, the absolute certainty that it was funny, that I should somehow join in the joke. And here's the weird part: the realization hit me in layers. First came disbelief. My parents, who had been my pillars, my witnesses through every betrayal, every lie, every painstaking reconstruction of my life, they were siding with him. That's right. Actively, willingly, cheering on the man who had ruined me. I had spent years untangling the financial mess he left, rebuilding my career while he vanished like some polished ghost of destruction. And my parents thought this was amusing. The laughter echoed in my head, this dissonant, surreal soundtrack to everything I thought I knew about loyalty, family, and fairness. My chest tightened, my pulse spiked, and I could feel that familiar sting behind my eyes. Not quite tears, not yet, just a sharp, unrelenting sting of betrayal. And in that sting, oddly, as certainties began to seep in. Like when something's so wrong that your brain refuses to stay paralyzed in shock and instead pivots to focus on what comes next. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made for them. Scholarships, my law degree, the long nights, the unpaid debts, the silent handling of their retirement plans, the trusts I'd set up so they'd live comfortably without ever touching their own finances too recklessly. And suddenly it hit me, the sheer audacity. They had chosen him over me, over my health, over my recovery, over the last decade of careful rebuilding. And yet, in that same moment, I felt a strange shift, a mental click that I'd been waiting for but didn't know I needed. The victim in me, the one trembling over shattered china and lukewarm tea, began to recede. In her place, the strategist emerged. My brain started ticking in patterns I recognized from my work as a lawyer: variables, leverage, precedent, contracts, authority, consequence. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was assessing, calculating, formulating. The betrayal, as deep as it cut, had a pattern, a logic. My parents weren't just being cruel. They were manipulable. And manipulable meant exploitable. And yeah, I know that sounds cold, but in that moment it was survival. My heart still hammered in my chest, and my hands shook, but somewhere under the raw emotion, I felt the pulse of power returning. I thought about Cameron, the way he had been this smooth, polished, impossible to read storm that had swept through my life. I remembered the court filings, the forged documents, the financial hemorrhage he'd left behind. And now, he was back. Not alone, but with my parents as his accomplices. They had forgotten who I was, not just as their daughter, not just as a person who had loved and suffered, but But as the person who had literally built the foundation they were standing on, it was infuriating, breathtaking, and galvanizing all at once. I realized I wasn't simply going to respond with anger or even confrontation, not yet. No, this required strategy, the kind that had won me complex contracts, the kind that forced resolution where emotion alone could not. And so, the reflection began. I traced every moment of my devotion to them, every dollar quietly handled, every sleepless night, every meticulous decision to shield them from risk, while I absorbed the fallout of Cameron's schemes. I thought about how, during the divorce, they had been the ones to sit with me through depositions, to watch the documents I had uncovered, to hear the lies laid bare. They had been my allies, my co-conspirators in truth. And now, I wasn't sure what to call them, because in siding with Cameron and actively enabling him to manipulate and charm, they were doing the exact opposite of protecting me, of protecting the truth, of honoring the sacrifices I had made for them. It was worse than betrayal by a stranger. It was betrayal by those who knew the stakes, who had once sworn to stand with me. And in that betrayal, I felt something else stir, an icy, precise fury. Not the kind that burns indiscriminately, but the kind that narrows the mind, sharpens it, and aligns every thought toward a singular, unrelenting goal: reclaim control. I realized the anger wasn't just emotional, it was practical. It demanded action, and for the first time, the tea-stained study, the shattered porcelain, the pounding pulse, it all felt like fuel. I started running scenarios in my head. If they thought this was a joke, if they thought they could manipulate the situation for a laugh, then they hadn't accounted for me, the lawyer, the strategist, the trustee of every asset they'd ever relied on me to manage. I remembered the trust I had set up, the lease for their villa, the clauses, the authority it had been designed to protect them. Yes, but also gave me ultimate control. The tools were all there. I just had to use them. And then I went deeper. I reflected on my own weaknesses, my moments of doubt over the years, and how I had always overcome them through clarity and calculation. This wasn't the time for panic or tears. It was the time for precision. I felt the transition, the shift from reactive to proactive, from hurt daughter to architect of consequences. Every past hardship, every sleepless night, every bitter court battle, it all fed this transformation. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a puzzle, a complex web of relationships, loyalties, and manipulations that I now began to map in my mind. Cameron had motives, my parents had vulnerabilities, and I had the power. The realization was almost dizzying. My pulse slowed slightly as the fog of raw emotion lifted, replaced by a crystalline focus. I could see the board, the pieces, and the moves. I knew what needed to happen. And yet, I stayed human, feeling the ache of what had been, the shock, the hurt. I allowed myself those moments of disbelief, the brief flinches at the audacity, the small pangs of sorrow at the lost trust. But beneath it all, the strategy was forming, and with it came a calm I hadn't felt in days, weeks, maybe months. I knew my next steps would be calculated. I would investigate, confirm, verify. I would gather evidence, track every move, every meeting, every interaction that had been hidden from me. And I would use the tools I had, my legal expertise, my authority as trustee, My understanding of financial and contractual leverage to turn the tables completely. I imagined the scenario, breaking it down logically, even picturing Cameron's smirk faltering, my parents' smugness evaporating under the weight of facts. And here's the thing, the anger didn't diminish my humanity. It focused it. It didn't make me cruel. It made me precise. And as I sat back, staring at the tea stain, feeling the shards under my shoes, I realized something remarkable. I was no longer powerless. I had been underestimated, and that underestimation would be my advantage. The emotional storm was still there, sure. My heart still ached with the betrayal, my chest still tight with the sting of disbelief, my hands still trembling. But it was now harnessed, directed, sharpened into a weapon of foresight and action. The victim role had been shed, cast aside like the broken teacup that had begun it all. In its place, a professional, a strategist, a woman who could leverage every element of this twisted family game to reclaim control. And the strange, almost intoxicating feeling of power began to take hold. I could feel it in my bones, in the rhythm of my pulse, in the way my thoughts began to weave patterns of counter moves and contingencies. Every insult, every betrayal, every dismissive laugh my parents had delivered, it became a clue, a piece of the puzzle. And that puzzle, I realized with a grim smile, would be solved entirely on my terms. After that initial shock, I didn't move for a while. I just sat, staring at the broken teacup, the brown stain creeping across the polished desk, thinking through every angle, every tiny detail I could remember about Cameron, my parents, and the chain of events that had led me to this insane point. And then, slowly, deliberately, my mind began to click into gear. I realized that panic wasn't going to help me. Anger was just fuel. What I needed was precision. Strategy, the kind I'd honed over decades of contract law, mergers, and high-stakes negotiation, and I knew exactly where to start. I reached for the phone, feeling a slight tremor in my fingers, and dialed Marcus. Marcus, a private investigator I'd used once on a thorny corporate case. The kind of guy who didn't ask questions, didn't flinch at dirt, and would find the truth no matter how deeply it was buried. The moment he picked up, I was all business. No pleasantries, no hesitations. "Marcus," I said, my voice crisp, controlled. "I have a job for you. I need a full financial and personal workup on Cameron Reeves. All of it bank accounts, credit history, judgments, liens, the works. And most importantly, every contact he's had with my parents in the last 6 weeks. I want details, Marcus, dates, times, locations, interactions, everything." There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear him digesting the gravity in my tone. "Friday. You need it by Friday. It'll cost you..." I didn't even blink. I don't care about the cost. Just get it done. I hung up before he could protest further, feeling a cold, meticulous satisfaction wash over me. This wasn't just reaction anymore. This was planning. Then I called Sarah, my legal assistant. She was excellent, fast, efficient, and I knew she could pull the Walker family trust file in minutes. "Sarah, I know I'm on leave, but I need the Walker family trust. Every document, original agreement, and make sure you pay attention to the revocation and signatory clauses. And Sarah, this stays between us." There was a click of acknowledgement from her side. "Of course. Vanessa, you'll have it in 20 minutes." While waiting, I pored over the lease documents for my parents' luxury villa Sunset Palms Estates, 5 years ago, I had signed the lease as the trustee, the only signature that mattered. Without my approval, the lease would terminate and my parents would have 30 days to vacate. A clever contingency I had put in place, and, frankly, one I had never imagined I would have to use against them. I read the clauses carefully, the margins lined with my own notes, my handwriting meticulous and precise. Each line reminded me that I had always held the ultimate authority, that knowledge was almost intoxicating in its power. When Sarah's email arrived, I scanned the trust documents with a practiced eye, noting every clause that gave me control, every legal leverage point I could use if things escalated. I realized in that moment that I had all the tools I needed, all the authority, all the control, all the evidence, if only I could act decisively. For the next 48 hours, I barely ate, barely slept. The teacup stain, the shards on the floor, the buzzing memory of my parents' laughter, Cameron's smooth, infuriating smile, they all blurred together. Forming a backdrop to my planning, I sat at my desk, running every possible scenario through my mind, considering the financial implications, the legal maneuvers, the potential fallout if I acted too soon or too late. Then, early Friday morning, Marcus's report hit my inbox. I felt a twinge of apprehension, a flutter of anxiety that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. Opening it, my stomach dropped. Cameron wasn't just back in my parents' lives, he was in financial ruin. Sued by investors in New York, a lien on his Miami property, a judgment in California for fraud. Essentially, he was a toxic asset. And yet my parents were giving him access, influence, and opportunity. And then the surveillance logs. Week 1, Cameron at the golf course with Henry, lunch paid with a credit card, 90 days delinquent. Week 2, dinner with both parents, Helen dabbing at her eyes, Cameron holding her hand across the table. Week 4, the bank branch attempt. Henry trying to add Cameron as a signatory, denied. They weren't just interacting, they were actively being manipulated. It was worse than I had imagined. A calculated play unfolding over weeks, perhaps months. My parents, the people I had protected and loved unconditionally, had been led into a trap of their own making, and it was Cameron at the center, using charm and deceit to entrench himself. And honestly, that cold logic, that methodical mapping of relationships and manipulations, was when I realized something else. This was no longer just a party problem. It was a potential threat to every asset I controlled, every safeguard I had put in place, every bit of financial and personal security I had built. Not just for myself, but for them as well. And my burnout, the mandated leave, the supposed vulnerability they were counting on it. Weren't they, my parents, in their naivety? And Cameron, in his cunning, thought they could use my absence, my supposed fragility, as a weapon. They underestimated me, and that thought, cold and precise, settled in my bones. I had every tool I needed, every legal leverage, every clause, every procedure I had meticulously set up. The Walker family trust, the villa lease, the authority vested in me, they were all mine. It was almost ironic, this turn of power. The very structure I had created to protect them now became the framework through which I would reassert control. I reviewed every document again, every page, every clause. I traced the language that ensured my decision-making was final. I ran through contingencies in my head. What if Cameron tried to manipulate them further? What if my parents pushed to dissolve the trust? What if they attempted any legal maneuver based on my mandated rest? The answer to all was the same: ultimate authority rested with me, and I would act deliberately, decisively, and publicly if needed. And there was a certain thrill in that clarity, a dark satisfaction that I hadn't felt in a long time. The plan began to crystallize. I would gather every piece of evidence, build a timeline, verify every interaction. I would confront them when the conditions were perfect, with all the facts in my hand, ready to reveal the depth of deception, the exact path Cameron had taken, and the dangerous complicity of my parents. I started organizing everything in a mental map: contacts, meetings, financial records, photographs, surveillance logs, affidavits. Each piece was a tool, a lever, a domino ready to fall in sequence. And here's the funny part: even as the strategy took shape, I allowed myself brief moments of disbelief, small pauses to let the absurdity of the situation wash over me, to let the cold fury simmer beneath the surface. But those moments were fleeting. Each pause, each reflection, each calculated breath only sharpened my focus, honed my mind for the meticulous execution to come. By Friday morning, when Marcus' full report landed, I was no longer that trembling, burned-out woman in a sunlit study. I was a strategist, a tactician, a lawyer in full command of the situation. Cameron was exposed, my parents' vulnerability laid bare, and the legal instruments I had designed years ago were ready to be wielded. I read through the surveillance logs again, taking note of every meeting, every hand held, every photo attached. Cameron's financial failures, the judgments against him, the pending fraud cases, it all lined up, forming a perfect storm of evidence. And then the intercepted call transcript. Helen, Cameron, plotting in tandem, speaking of my alleged fragility, speaking of dissolving the trust, manipulating my absence, plotting to claim what was mine. It was audacious, infuriating, and, yes, brilliant in its own way. But here's the thing: they had underestimated me. They had forgotten that I wasn't just a daughter or a woman recovering from burnout. I was a lawyer, a trustee, a strategist. I had anticipated contingencies. I had structured authority, and I had the resources to expose every move, every lie, every manipulation. Sitting there, reviewing Marcus' report, the weight of it on the passenger seat, I felt the shift from victim to architect of resolution complete. The calculations were precise, the plan cold and meticulous, the stakes terrifying, and yet underneath the precision there was a strange calm. I had all the cards. I understood every risk. Every maneuver was laid out in my mind, step by step, ready to be executed at the perfect moment. And that moment, I knew, would come not in haste, not in emotion, but in perfect timing, with facts as my weapon, clarity as my shield, and ultimate authority firmly in my grasp. The transformation was complete. The emotional surge had been harnessed, the chaos converted into strategy, the teacup, the shattered trust. The betrayal, they all became part of a meticulous blueprint that would finally let me reclaim control over what was mine and ensure that no one, not Cameron, not my parents, could ever manipulate it again. The day of the party arrived, and, well, I have to admit, My stomach was doing somersaults the entire morning. Not just nerves, but a tight, cold knot of anticipation. I'd spent days planning every detail, the flowers, the music, the guest list, but secretly, I was planning something far more important. Something that would need precision, timing, and a little bit of theater. I chose a crimson red dress that morning, a color that felt like a declaration of intent, of power, of control. Not flashy, but commanding in its simplicity. Walking into my house, which I had painstakingly reclaimed and rebuilt after the chaos of the last decade, I felt a strange calm settle over me. My friends were mingling, enjoying the music and the carefully arranged floral bouquets. Everything appeared normal, beautiful even, but beneath that ordinary celebratory surface, tension coiled like a spring, waiting to be released. I moved through the crowd with a glass of sparkling water in hand, exchanging smiles and light conversation, all the while keeping my eyes trained on the entrance. My mind was in a state of hyper-focus, analyzing, calculating, anticipating. And then there they were, my parents and Cameron, together. My mother, Helen, and my father, Henry, flanking him, walking with that smug, proprietary pride that made my skin crawl. Cameron looked the same as always, impossibly charming, effortlessly polished, the very picture of confidence. And that smile, the one that once drew me in and now made my stomach turn, was there, too. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The chatter faltered, the music seemed to dip, and I could feel the weight of every gaze on me. People who knew the story, who had seen me rebuild from devastation, glanced at one another, hesitant, uncertain, almost holding their breath. And then I spoke, calm, controlled, conversational, like I was telling a story, but every word intentional. "Cameron," I said, letting my tone linger just long enough to make him pause. What a surprise. The practiced charm faltered for the briefest moment, just enough for me to see it. I couldn't, and would not, say I was happy to see him. Not after everything, not with my parents orchestrating this grotesque homecoming. He laughed, that smooth, polished laugh, the kind meant to disarm, to charm, to make the other person doubt their own resolve. "Vanessa, still so dramatic," he said, lowering his voice, leaning in. "Happy birthday. Your parents insisted I come. I just wanted to wish you well. Time to let the past go." Don't you think he reached toward me? That old, familiar gesture. And I stepped back, deliberate, careful, controlling the space between us. I could feel the room tensing, every friend and guest catching the shift. Perfect. Just as it should be, I turned to the jazz trio I had hired. "Excuse me, gentlemen, could you take a break? Thank you." The music stopped. Silence filled the room, a perfect canvas for what I was about to paint. I lifted the microphone, allowing the weight of presence to fall naturally across the space. "Hello, everyone," I began, my voice steady, casual, yet demanding attention. "Thank you all for coming to my 55th birthday. It means more to me than you know." My gaze swept across the room, lingering on friends who had stood by me through everything, who had helped me piece together my life after Cameron had left it in ruins. Most of you know what I went through 10 years ago. Most of you were here to help me pick up the pieces. And you all know the man who held the hammer. I pointed toward Cameron, letting the words sink in, letting the tension build. just a little. His smile wavered, imperceptibly at first, then just enough for the room to notice. My parents' faces tightened, the forced pride faltering under the weight of exposure. "What you don't know," I continued, pacing just slightly, conversationally, naturally, letting the words flow, "is that this man has been consulting with my parents for the last 6 weeks, convincing them that I am the problem, that I am unwell, that the trusts I set up to protect them, to give them a life of comfort, is actually a cage I built around them." My mother's face turned pale, fury flashing and then quickly masked. My father's jaw tightened, lips pressed together, the weight of realization pressing down. "They've been manipulated," I said, voice steady, almost intimate, as if sharing a secret while broadcasting it to everyone. "And Cameron," I added, letting a pause stretch, just long enough to let it land. "He's been plotting to claim what is mine, using my family against me." A collective gasp rippled across the room. Friends shifted, eyes darting between the trio at the entrance and me, the unfolding drama impossible to ignore. Cameron's smooth calm began to crack, the charm eroding, his carefully practiced demeanor slipping. I moved toward the table at the center of the room, where I had placed a thick folder, evidence meticulously collected, every piece of the puzzle laid out. My heart hammered, but my voice remained conversational, natural, controlled. "Mom, Dad, you came here expecting me to roll over. You laughed at my pain. You plotted with the man who nearly destroyed my life. You labeled me unwell, sensitive, hysterical. You made your choice. But now, the truth is here." I lifted a single crisp piece of paper from the folder, the lease renewal for their villa, due yesterday. It was both symbolic and literal, authority in paper form. "This," I said, voice steady, deliberate, "was meant to allow you to continue living in comfort, but the choice was yours, and the choice you made," I paused, letting it sink in, "was to side with a con artist over your own daughter." The silence was suffocating. Guests leaned in, catching every inflection, every subtle pause, every carefully measured word. Cameron's eyes darted, searching for an opening, a retort, anything. My mother's face twisted in disbelief and outrage. I lifted another stack of papers, letting them spill slightly across the table. A subtle, controlled chaos, enough for the audience to see that this wasn't just empty words. Court judgments, bank statements, affidavits from other victims, they were all there. Tangible evidence of the web Cameron had spun and my parents had willingly stepped into. Cameron's smile disappeared. He looked cornered, trapped, exposed. The room absorbed it all. My parents, my mother especially, tried to maintain composure, but their expressions betrayed fear, confusion, and the first hints of panic. "And this," I said, lifting another document carefully, letting my tone remain calm, casual, conversational even, "is the 1-year lease I signed this morning. It's for a very clean, functional 1-bedroom apartment, above a laundromat, 30 days. That's your timeline." My mother let out a strangled gasp, a mixture of fury and panic. My father's face drained of color, as if the weight of reality was physically pressing down on him. Cameron stepped forward, and I caught the brief glint of defiance in his eyes, but it was fleeting. I held up the final piece, a small key. "And this," I said softly, almost tenderly, yet firmly, "is the key Your independence starts on the first of the month. You have 30 days to vacate my property." My mother's sob tore through the room, raw and primal, a sound of pure, unfiltered emotion. Rage, disbelief, panic, humiliation. The tension in the room was electric, charged. Every eye on the unfolding confrontation, Cameron, realizing the trap was complete, started toward the door. He didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't even look back. He left, fleeing the room, and the final thread of his charm, his manipulation, evaporated. The room exhaled collectively. Silence descended, thick, palpable, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. My mother, trembling, pointed at me. "You will regret this. You will be old and alone. You are no daughter of mine." Her voice broke, the force of her words almost comical in their desperate fury. I let the tears slip, not of sadness, but the crushing weight of betrayal and the hard satisfaction of strategic victory. "You're right," I said, calm, measured, conversational, letting the room feel the finality of the moment. "I am not. The daughter you can manipulate, laugh at, and betray is gone. Now, please, get out of my house." My father didn't look at me. He simply grabbed my mother's arm, and together they left, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The guests looked around, absorbing the shock, the relief, the clarity of the moment. Cameron was gone. My parents defeated, my authority reaffirmed, and the night everything was firmly under my control. And in that stillness, in that quiet aftermath, I felt something profound. The storm had passed. The climax, brutal, precise, and utterly satisfying, had reached its peak. The power, the home, the trust, the evidence, it was all mine. The tension released. But the lesson lingered. Boundaries were established, control had been reclaimed, and the theater of deceit had been exposed for everyone to witness. The birthday, ostensibly a celebration, had become the stage for resolution, a place where truth, strategy, and timing combined to create an unforgettable, irrevocable moment of reckoning. After that night, everything shifted. The air in the house felt different, lighter, charged with a quiet, almost imperceptible relief. Cameron didn't return. 2 days later, the warrants, the fraud cases, the mounting evidence, everything converged, and he was arrested. I mean, can you believe it? The man who had haunted my life for over a decade, who had left me in financial ruin, manipulating everyone around him, was suddenly out of the picture entirely. And just like that, the threat that had loomed over me, over my assets, over my peace of mind, evaporated. I won't lie, it felt surreal. I had imagined this day in quiet, meticulous detail, but living it, seeing it unfold, it hit differently. There was this incredible weight lifted off my shoulders, a sense of validation that was almost physical. Like the first deep breath you take after swimming underwater for too long. My parents, well, they tried, of course. True to form. Helen attempted to hire the probate lawyer Cameron had recommended, the one they thought could contest the trust. But the reality was inescapable. I had everything in order. Every piece of documentation, every clause, every contingency built into the trust, ironclad and unassailable. The lawyer quickly realized their position was hopeless. My parents' bluff, their little game, crumbled instantly, and the echo of their defeat was, well, almost poetic. And suddenly, the villa. that beautiful sunlit Sunset Palms estate where they had lived for years, became irrelevant. The furniture, the coastal chic decor, the perfectly manicured lawn, it all lost its power. They had no leverage, no control, no reason to manipulate. The keys, the leases, the authority were in my hands, and for the first time in years, I could exhale fully. I took stock of the house after the party, walking slowly through each room. The echoes of laughter, whispers of tension, and the clatter of papers thrown across the floor were fading, leaving a space of quiet that was almost sacred. I realized that my home was finally mine, not just legally, but emotionally, psychologically. The control I had feared losing during those weeks of manipulation and plotting had been reclaimed, and I could breathe again. I changed the locks immediately. A small act of security, yes, but also a symbolic one, a boundary, a declaration that the house, my life, and my assets were no longer negotiable, no longer subject to others' whims or machinations. It was subtle, yet incredibly empowering. My daily routine slowly returned, unhurried and reflective. Mornings were quiet, the sun casting soft light over the living room as I sipped tea that didn't need to be rushed, didn't need to be a backdrop to anxiety or betrayal. I began reconnecting with friends who had stood by me, those who had witnessed the fallout, the meticulous planning, the confrontation. We would sit together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with wine, sometimes just sharing stories, and each visit reinforced the reality that I was no longer isolated. No one judged me for the steps I had taken, the decisions I had made. They simply acknowledged my victory, my hard-won peace, and slowly, life began to feel normal again. I went back to my doctor, Dr. Evans, who, after reviewing my vital signs and my emotional state, smiled. "It seems you've performed a successful, if radical, extraction of the two largest sources of your stress," she said. Her voice, warm and approving. And she was right. My mandated leave, the burnout, the constant tension, they were gone, replaced by a calm certainty, a clear-headedness that I hadn't realized I had been missing for so long. I began to focus on small pleasures that had been ignored for years. Gardening became a new ritual. Planting, pruning, nurturing life. It was meditative, grounding, and strangely restorative. Even the small victories, like seeing the first blooms on a bush I had planted myself, carried weight, significance. Each new leaf, each blossom, reminded me that I had rebuilt more than just my home and my finances. I had rebuilt my sense of self, my parents' lives. Meanwhile, had shifted dramatically. Helen took a job as a receptionist at a local community center. The former headmistress, now answering phones, her days structured differently, quieter, and, as I later learned, humbling. Henry adjusted to the smaller, simpler apartment at Sunset Arms, above the laundromat, learning to navigate a life without the privileges and excesses they had become accustomed to. The transition was not easy, and there was tension. Of course, there were still echoes of their disbelief and bitterness, moments of complaint or passive-aggressive remark. But the framework I had created ensured that they were safe, yet completely disempowered from causing harm. It was subtle justice, measured and deliberate. I received one text from my mother on the 1st of the month after the move. It was short, venomous, laced with all the words of her old fury, I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family." I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back a single word: "No," and I blocked her number. That was the end of communication, a quiet but firm boundary. Weeks turned into months, and life continued, gradually, with a sense of normalcy I hadn't thought possible. I returned to my work, to my office, to my routines, but now with a sense of control and security that allowed for balance. There were no more looming threats, no manipulations from Cameron, no betrayals hidden behind familial bonds. And honestly, it felt surreal. Every day I would wake up and realize that my life, my house, my finances, my boundaries, they were all firmly under my authority, and that in itself was liberating. Small acts of closure became important. I sold the coastal chic furniture that my parents had brought with them. Pieces that had once seemed untouchable, now just objects to be removed, cleared, and replaced. The act of selling them, watching them leave, was quietly satisfying. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming space, reclaiming control, reclaiming life. Letters and calls from lawyers, financial advisors, and even authorities connected to Cameron's case gradually faded. The threat was neutralized, the danger dissolved, and each day reinforced the permanence of that victory. And I began to reflect on the past decade, the mistakes, the heartbreak, the manipulations, the long nights of rebuilding, the betrayals, and finally, the triumph. The clarity and control I now felt was hard-won, but real. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had acted decisively, strategically, and with integrity, even when faced with impossible odds. 6 months later, I received a letter from my father. It was hesitant, full of the usual weak platitudes, but buried in it was a small acknowledgement. The words, simple and halting, caught my attention. "I'm sorry, Vanessa. It was never a joke. It was just greed, and we were wrong." That sentence stood out among the banalities, a small acknowledgement of truth from a man who had rarely confronted reality. I didn't reply, but I did act quietly, thoughtfully. I set up a small, anonymous stipend for him, managed through a third party, to ensure he had enough for groceries, for headphones to block out the laundromat. Small comforts without restoring any measure of control or power. It wasn't forgiveness. Not really. But it was acknowledgement, a recognition that even amidst betrayal, there can be a small measure of humanity, a tiny thread of decency. My mother never reached out, and I didn't expect her to. The distance, the consequences, and the boundaries were firm and absolute. And in the quiet of my home, the soft morning light streaming through the windows, the faint hum of daily life outside, I felt a peace that had been absent for far too long. My house was mine. My life was mine. My future was mine. The guest list, finally, had been secured not just for parties, but for the life I wanted to live. It was a life free from manipulation, free from betrayal, free from the lingering shadow of those who had once sought to control me. And yes, the recovery was gradual. I learned to sleep through the night without waking in a panic. I learned to garden without obsessing over outcomes. I reconnected with friends, sharing laughter and quiet moments, and realized that these simple human experiences, food, wine, conversation, friendship, were perhaps the most meaningful victories of all. It wasn't about the house, or the leases, or the legal maneuvers anymore. Those had been critical. Yes, but the real triumph was intangible, internal. It was control over my emotions, my space, my autonomy. It was the calm after the storm, the quiet victories of regained independence, of boundaries respected and enforced. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was still and the city lights twinkled below, I would allow myself to reflect on everything: the betrayal, the confrontation, the triumph, the slow, measured process of reclaiming life piece by piece. And I realized, with a quiet, almost private satisfaction, that I had done it. I had navigated the chaos, the lies, the manipulations, and emerged intact, whole, and in command. There was no grand applause, no dramatic fanfare, just quiet reflection, peace, and the knowledge that the hard-won boundaries I had established would endure. My 56th birthday was nothing like the last, just a small gathering in my garden, surrounded by a few close friends. Laughter and conversation floating through the warm air. No surprises, no games, no manipulations, just a life reclaimed. And in that quiet, unassuming moment, I felt a profound sense of completion. The house, the money, the control, they were mine. But more than that, the sense of self, the peace, the understanding that I could navigate even the most intricate betrayals and emerge whole, was mine too. That, in the end, was a true victory. And that's it. Life finally. Quiet. My home. My choices, my peace, all firmly in my hands. No more manipulation, no more chaos. Just the calm I'd been chasing for years. It's amazing what taking control can feel like. Right. If this story had you on the edge, maybe give it a like, or subscribe to catch more stories like this, moments that remind us how messy, wild, and sometimes satisfying life can really be when you stand your ground.